Hi, I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Mary Rose.
And welcome back to our podcast, Reading Through Scripture. We are in Exodus chapter 20, which means we are getting to probably one of the most well-known passages, even by those outside of Judaism and Christianity. What are we reading today, Mary Rose?
The Ten Commandments.
All right, well, let's pick it up.
Exodus chapter 20. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them, or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Let's start by just looking at the first two verses, because this is kind of the setup, and this is really important. This whole section doesn't start with a you shall not. What does it start with?
I am the Lord your God.
So it starts first with reminding them of who God is and his personal relationship to them. And what does it then remind them of what's gone on?
Well, it reminds them of what God did, that he brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery.
So it starts with reminding them of God's blessings and how he's been on their side. And that was before they had the commandments, before they knew what they needed to obey and what they were supposed to do. So God choosing them, bringing them out of Egypt, was not based on their obedience. Their obedience comes as a response, or is supposed to be a response, to the relationship they have to God. And I think that's important. And we'll talk about in a little bit the nature of the Christian and our relationship to the Ten Commandments. Because I think that's an important question we need to ask. But I think it's important to start this out and remind ourselves that it begins with reminding ourselves not of what we need to do, but of what God has already done for them. And for us, we might not phrase it that way with who brought you out of Egypt in the land of slavery, but out of the dominion of Satan, out of the land of darkness and death and despair, and has brought us into the kingdom of his Son. Therefore, we should live differently.
You know, I feel like when I've read this in the past, I always read that statement just in light of you shall have no other gods before me, and not in light of the commandments as a whole.
We'll get to this too, but as Luther puts it, breaking any of the commandments is really just breaking the first commandment.
Sure.
So, yes, breaking the first one. All of them are just ways that we do that. And this is the other, I think, really important note at the beginning that we remind ourselves of, is the Hebrew word here for this is, yours put it rightly. Where it said,
Hebrew word for what?
For what we call these.
Oh.
Yours said at the beginning, and God spoke all these words. So when they're referred to in the scriptures, they're not called the Ten Commandments, aside from it in our headings that are not actually the text. It's Dabar, which is the words. So these are the 10 words, which I think reminds us that our faith is about God's word, God's instruction, trust in what he's given to us and said to us, not primarily based on do's and don'ts.
Well, and the Ten Commandments are only perfectly kept by the Word made flesh.
Yep, 100%. And so it's important to just remember that. And then I think I need to do this before we get into them, because otherwise, I'm assuming it's mostly Lutherans that are listening to us, but if not, we need to address the numbering of the commandments, because not every tradition has them the same way.
Right.
And so how do we number the commandments? Well, the Jews still have 10 words, but they would include what we consider the introduction, what we just talked about, I am the Lord your God, as the first commandment. And then they combine what we would put as 1 and 2. So the you shall have no other gods and not make a carved image. And then they have the last two, as what we would call the two about coveting, as one commandment. And then Lutherans and Augustine and Roman Catholics would consider the first commandment, you shall have no other gods, and the second to be, you shall not make a carved image, as one commandment. And then the last two about coveting as separate commandments. Whereas the Reformed and most of the other Protestant traditions consider you shall have no other gods and you shall not make an image as two separate commands, not a clarification of the first commandment.
What's the reasoning behind that departure?
They would say, and it's less clear here, that in Exodus, they would say those last two are really just the same commandment. That the coveting is just repeated and making a further clarification. And I think, and we'll get to this when we get down there, that reading it in light of Deuteronomy, where the Ten Commandments are listed again, and they use different words for the last, what we would call the last two commandments, make it clear that those are two separate issues. But we'll get to that when we get down there.
Okay.
But, so, we're going to follow how the Roman Catholics, how Lutherans, how Augustine have always numbered the commandments when we talk about them. So we'll go through with the first commandment being, you shall have no other gods before me, and that including that you shall not make a carved image, or make an idol, essentially. And so it's important to think, just recognizing if anybody else is listening that's not Lutheran or Roman Catholic and would be like, well, that's not how I would number the commandments. There's not a set number. This is just the way that we interpret them.
Well, there is a set number.
There's not a
set way you have to group them.
There's not a set way you have to group them. Yeah, thank you. And I think as we begin to think about these, the other thing to keep in mind is that these are not primarily about the individual. They're about the community. Like, you can't do these commandments or keep these commandments apart from being in community with other people. So they're about our relationships with God and with others. So sometimes we're in a very individualistic society, but these are for the community of God's people who are collectively to be a light to the nations. That's just a reminder to me that they're not about us in ourselves, but in relationship with others, with God and then with our neighbor.
Sure.
And so it's important to remember that, like, these have an impact on others, which makes sense, and if you read them, you can't really avoid that. But I think sometimes we get so individually focused and focused on ourselves that the reminder is that this is about having a healthy community and having a healthy and right relationship with God that then leads to a healthy community as a whole. And we could try to legislate morality, but if we don't actually have that relationship with God and the priorities right, legislating the laws doesn't actually really make things better. I mean, it might hinder some things, but it doesn't actually create more moral people.
If you're not following all the commandments because of that first one, that he is the Lord our God, then they're kind of shallow carrying out those commandments.
Well, and they become really ultimately about self-serving justification. I'm trying to prove my own goodness and not about doing it out of a response to the love I've received. Which means even when I do things for my neighbor or do the right thing, it's not actually about my neighbor. We've turned him individual. We've turned him really to be about ourselves. And we've talked about this a lot in some different contexts, but I think this is where the idea of good works and the idea of good works as a Christian who does those because it's who we now are as God's people, versus doing it to try and prove my worth or make my life worthwhile, which then actually makes all of my good deeds ultimately selfish, even if they still bless and benefit my neighbor. If they're really about making myself look good, it's not actually because I give a rip about my neighbor. It's because I actually only care about myself, even if I'm still doing things that are a blessing to others. And I think we could say how all of these commandments and our morality hangs on kind of two precepts. That we believe that God is actually real. He loves us and he wants us in relationship with him, and that he gets to determine what right and wrong is. And righteousness can't be attained without redemption. So we can't be righteous without first being redeemed. And that's even true, I think, for the Jews and the Hebrews. Because they would say, right, and that's what I was talking about with the first kind of 2 verses, that their redemption always precedes righteousness. And worship is always preceded by redemption. We don't worship God unless we've first been redeemed or recognize it. Is what leads us into that.
Yeah, worship because you're commanded to isn't really worship.
Yeah, exactly. So this leads, I think, into the first commandment, as we would number them. And remember that for us, that would be verses 3 through 6. And so I think verse 4 through 6 is really just the extended commentary on the first commandment. So it is acknowledging that you shall have no other gods before me. That is, before his face is kind of the way it's translated. It literally reads in Hebrew. So you shall have no gods before my face. That is, as in above him or even in his presence. So it's not just that, like, well, you can have other gods, they just can't be above me. But they can't even be in his presence, because God does not abide or does not allow for other things to be worshipped as co-equal. So, we just heard, what was it, the statement from the Pope, was it a month or 2 ago, that clarifying that Mary cannot be called co-redemptrix. You shouldn't need to clarify that, but that's a reminder that there's something they got right there in that clarification. She cannot be put on that level. Some of their practice, I think, still doesn't always follow through with that, but seems to elevate her in some ways. And I think this is an important clarification when you think about the context they're coming out of. Because they've just come from Egypt. And what do you know about ancient Egypt and their worship?
Well, they have a lot of gods. And they view their pharaoh as a god.
Yep.
And they viewed the gods as powerful but fickle.
And you could make an image and offer things to kind of for lack of a better way of putting it, to feed them, to appease them, right? Give them this thing. And so you had all these different gods, some that had a horse and a cow and a eagle, and I don't know if there was an eagle, I can't remember, I think there was. I don't know all the Egyptian gods because it's not my field of study. But they have all these pantheon of gods. And so this is a reminder for the Israelites as God is establishing a new people and creating a new language and a new culture, that the thing they're not supposed to do is try and create something that imitates who Yahweh is, to mediate their worship, which we'll see, unfortunately, in about 12 chapters. they really suck at this.
Right.
And it's really not that long after these are given that they, spoiler alert, make a golden calf. And Luther, I think there's a place where it's good to note what Luther says in the Large Catechism, where he reminds us that a God is that which we look to for all good, and where we resort for help in every time of need. To have a God is simply to trust and believe in one with our whole heart. And then he adds, as I have often said, the confidence and faith of the heart alone make both a God and an idol. If your faith and confidence are right, then likewise your God is the true God. On the other hand, if your confidence is false, if it is wrong, then you have not the true God. For the two, faith and God, have inevitable connection. Now I say, whatever your heart clings to and confides in, that is really your God. What Luther's getting at is that everyone worships something and has a God. Even the atheist who claims they have no God, they fear, love, and trust in something. It may be themselves, it may be science, it may be whatever. Mm-hmm. But we all put fear, love, and trust into something. Or, to how I often paraphrase Luther's fear, love, and trust, we all find identity, security, and meaning in something. And wherever you look to for those three things is ultimately your God. And so this is just that reminder that it's important to clarify what we really believe and who's worthy of worship and where we're really locating our identity, locating our security in this life, and locating meaning. Because we're tempted, especially in a culture that is prosperous, to locate security in either money or in the military prowess that our country has. We're tempted to, our culture is driving us in so many ways to locate our identity in false things. In political ideology. As I've said, even, probably for the last 12 years, that for a large section of our population, their identity is located in their sexual orientation. Mm-hmm. Like that, they've rooted who they are in something far less complete than what God would have them see themselves as. And we all, I think, are longing to figure out, how do our lives have purpose? And so I think those are just things that we all desire. And I've quoted, I think, to you multiple times, and if you're a listener, if you've never read it or listened to it, I'd encourage you to listen to the whole commencement speech by David Foster Wallace at Kenyon College. I'm just gonna share a short bit of it. But he eloquently argues that everyone worships, and that the only choice we get is what to worship. And this is a guy who claimed he was an atheist, and then said, well, I need to believe in something. But clearly didn't have a full grasp on it, because I think it was 3 months after he gave this speech that he committed suicide. But he goes on to say in that, to tap real meaning in life, that we need to worship something, and that there's a good reason to worship Yahweh or Buddha or any of the major religions. Because he says all the other things that we often worship, like beauty and power and intellect, all steal our life because they can't deliver on it. Mm-hmm. They end up eating you alive. He uses the beautiful image, or I don't know if beautiful is the right word, but the image of, if you worship beauty, they'll plant you in the ground 1,000 times before they actually bury you. Because every new wrinkle is a new death. Every time you see any sign of aging, you're crushed and you're killed. If you worship power, you'll always be afraid of someone more powerful, which is why you've got to attack anyone that you think might be a threat. Think King Herod. Think tyrants today. If you worship your intellect, you'll always be afraid of being found out that you're a fraud or that someone's smarter than you. you always live this insecure life that just eats you alive, which is exactly what Luther said 500 years ago, that you can't not worship. And there's a lot of things that Calvin says that I don't like, that I don't agree with. But I think he's spot on when he's reflecting on this and says that by nature our hearts are restless idol factories. We constantly want to put something in the place of God. And that's hard. It's hard to fight that. And I think every other commandment that we break is ultimately a failure to uphold this commandment. Because why do we steal?
We're worried we won't have enough.
So we don't trust that God's going to provide. Why might we covet?
Because we feel like we don't have what we deserve.
We're not satisfied, right? We constantly fail to trust that we're actually God's children, whom he loves, who he cares for, who he will provide, who are secure in his hands. And so we constantly want to place other things in that role that we think we can manipulate, we think we can control, we think we can grasp, so that we can have that identity, security, and meaning in a way that I think we can manage. Do you remember what I believe is Mr. Beaver, but I can't remember now for sure, in Chronicles of Narnia, says to Lucy, I think it is.
Oh, is this when she asks, it's not, he's good, but he's dangerous, right?
He's not safe.
He's not safe.
She asks, is he safe? He's not safe, but he's good.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing we struggle with. We like safety. We like homeostasis. We like things to be comfortable. I don't know that God likes things to be comfortable, to be honest. At least not in this life for us. Because comfort often here and now leads to complacency. But he is good. He wants what's best for us. But we want a God who's safe, who's controllable, who we can predict how he's going to act. And in some ways we can, right? We know if we ask God for mercy, God will always respond with mercy. But we're also struck with places like in Joshua, before Joshua goes to Jericho and he encounters the angel of the Lord, the leader of Yahweh's armies. And he takes off his sandals and he says, well, are you for us or against us? And do you remember his answer, the angel's answer?
Doesn't he just say, I'm the commander of the army of the Lord and I have come?
No. So Joshua asks, are you on our side or on theirs? Neither. I'm on the Lord's side. That's uncomfortable to us because we want to make sure that he's always on our side. And there might be times where because of our injustice, because of our blindness, God isn't actually on our side in the sense of like what we want in this world.
Yeah, I was thinking how even more than like wanting a God that's like safe and predictable, we want a God who follows our agenda.
Sure. So this goes with why we're not supposed to make idols. Because even if it wouldn't be a calf, the other thing that we still do today is we want to make God into our own image. You know, there's I'm trying to remember who it is that says it. Some artist that was talking that had come out of the evangelical world and was coming to the realization that Jesus wasn't a white middle-class Republican. And, like, that doesn't mean that he's opposed to all things that, like, he's not opposed to white middle-class Republicans, but it's just like, he's not in their image. He doesn't fit their agenda.
Right.
And I think we've forgotten that sometimes. And the temptation is always to try and make God look like us. Which, you know, that's my problem with most of the paintings of Jesus, is what do they look like?
A Renaissance man?
So,
Because they were painted in the Renaissance?
likely a Northern European Caucasian.
Yeah.
And what's the one thing we do know about Jesus?
He was Middle Eastern.
He was a Middle Eastern Jew. So he certainly doesn't look like a long, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man.
Yeah.
I think most of the time they have brown eyes, but beside the point. And not only that, I always find it entertaining because in Corinthians, Paul reminds us that it's an abomination for a man to have long hair in that context. Jesus most likely didn't have long hair. But every painting you see of Jesus, he's like Fabio, in the modern commercials. You're like, that's not actually probably what he looked like. Which is okay. He's still for everybody. But he doesn't necessarily need to be in our image. And so I think we also need to deal then with verse 4 to 6. Why is it that we as Lutherans and Roman Catholics as well, and I think Eastern Orthodox, are comfortable with having a painting of Jesus or having a crucifix where Jesus is depicted and not calling that idolatry?
I don't know. I was going to ask you that.
Okay. So that's a question you have.
Well, I just feel like there's like a whole bunch of ways people misread these verses. And like, I don't have a super good answer. Like, I know that we don't call that idolatry, but like, I can't tell you why.
Okay, sure. So here in the Old Testament, we hear again and again that no one can see God face to face and live, right? Mm-hmm. So when Moses asked to see God's glory in a few short chapters, or I think it's chapter 34, God says, you can't or you'll die, but I'll cover you with my hand and you can see my back. And Isaiah, when he even just gets the vision, he says, woe is me, I am lost, for I'm a man of unclean lips in the midst of a people of unclean lips. And so he knows that he deserves to die for this. But in light of the New Testament, what would we say? How has God manifested himself?
In Jesus.
He has. And it says the fullness of God dwelt bodily in Christ. So here and now in the Old Testament, in Exodus 20, you can't make an image of God because God has not taken on an image yet. Now, in light of the New Testament, we can say, well, we can depict what God looks like in a physical form because he's taken on human form. Now, do I think there's some lines we need to be wary of as we depict Jesus? Sure. I think when we start to make paintings that try and make him look a lot like us, that's a problem. But when we're doing, carvings or him on the cross, where you can't necessarily tell ethnicity, it's just whatever. You can't tell what ethnicity is. It's just his shape as a human form. I think that's perfectly fine. Obviously, we still have some paintings hanging up in a lot of Lutheran churches that have kind of the Renaissance Jesus, if you will, or some new thing. And I don't think that's necessarily sinful, but I don't know that it's particularly helpful to us or beneficial.
I guess it's just confusing because it doesn't actually say you shall not make an image of God. It says you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. Like, that's very confusing. It seems like it's saying specific? You can't make art. Like, that's what that sounds like.
Which, I mean, if we go in that direction, which some have, then what do you do when you get to the tabernacle being made in the rest of Exodus? And they're weaving in and sewing in images of the stars. When you make the cherubim, the angels that are over the mercy seat, those are clearly images depicted. Mm-hmm. But they weren't the focus of the worship, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the ark becomes a bit of an idol later, and that's a whole other issue. But at least initially, they recognized that wasn't depicting God. It was meant to lead them to understand that God was the one enthroned over all creation. And so I think there has to be some nuance and reading between the lines.
Okay, I haven't really heard that as the explanation, like that we have God embodied in Christ, so we don't have to follow this. But that to me sounds like a really slippery slope.
Tell me more.
Like I mean, there are people who say we don't need to follow the Ten Commandments at all because we now live in a new covenant because of Jesus. Like,
sure.
I'm uncomfortable with the argument of like we can throw this out because Jesus.
Sure. I would say that that's properly directing worship to God. Because the point of this...
What is?
When we have a depiction of Jesus, as long as we're not... If this is helping us meditate on who God is and how he reveals himself to us, then I don't think that's idolatry in the same way.
Would you say that also of the Hebrews at this point, if they had made
an image
of I don't know, angels?
Well, no, because the angels aren't God.
I don't know. Like,
I mean, and I guess if they had made an image of, like, the cloud on the mountain, maybe not. Although the problem is that God doesn't remain on the mountain, right? That's why they're building the tabernacle, so that God can go with them.
Sure.
So, maybe the cloud, in a sense, because it's still the cloud that fills the tabernacle and fills the temple when they consecrate it. I don't know if that's the right word.
So, okay, can you talk about, like, how, like, the different views of the Eastern Orthodox Church? Because they're way more into, like, icons than the Roman Catholic or most of the Protestants.
Sure.
Like, is that because they have a different understanding of this commandment?
Yes, in part, and also, I actually don't think their view is healthy either. Because a lot of their images and their icons, there's a number of them that are about Jesus that I have less problem with that. But they have some that are of the saints that they still also use as a reflection, and they think that draws them closer to God. And I don't know enough. I've only talked to a handful of Eastern Orthodox Christians to know really how they view it. Honestly, most of them that I know are Serbian Orthodox, and a majority of them weren't practicing when I knew them well enough, and then the one other essentially left and became Lutheran. So I don't know, they're not necessarily the people that I think would give me the most clarity on that issue. I think if you have the icons that are like, one of my favorites of theirs is the harrowing of hell. It's the picture of Jesus on the cross, or coming out of the cross, pulling Adam and Eve out of the tomb, or out of the grave, which, if you know ancient tradition of the early church, that the tradition is that Golgotha is the burial place of Adam and Eve, that Jerusalem, because that's right outside the city, and Jerusalem was the original Garden of Eden, and so Jesus is pulling them out of the grave, redeeming them by his resurrection. Like, I think that's beautiful, and helps me, in a sense, think about, like, the redemption of all humanity in Christ. And I don't think that's, like, a bad thing. I think if I believe there's merit to that, in the sense of, like, reflecting on it makes me more holy or something, then there's a problem.
Is that, like, the position of, like, the Catholic Church and, like, the relics?
I don't know if Eastern Orthodox would say it bestows merit on them or not.
No, I'm asking about Catholics and relics.
Would they say...
Because don't they think that? Like, if you touch, like, the shroud of something, like...
Or if you go and observe it, you get granted forgiveness.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if that's exactly how Eastern Orthodox people would think of meditating on an icon or not.
Oh.
In a lot of ways. I'm actually probably far more comfortable with what the Eastern Orthodox do with icons, at least to my limited knowledge of it, than I am with what the Roman Catholics do with relics.
Why is that?
Because I think if you're reflecting on the story, and at least if what I understand is true, that they don't believe there's actual extra merit in it, I think it's just like us reflecting on stories in the scripture. those are good things as we reflect on the character of God or on the character of the saints. That's not a negative thing if I don't think that it actually makes me holier. So I looked it up, and I want to clarify a little bit more about Eastern Orthodox and their view of icons. So they're meant to honor the person that they venerate, if it's a saint, and to lead reflection upon them. And they would claim, kind of like what I was saying earlier, that because God became man, he became depictable. That is, making icons is a key part of the incarnation belief on their side, that we think that God can be shown and displayed. And so they would say, this is where we might have a problem, that they can be used to facilitate prayer and connect believers with the divine, acting as a bridge to the spiritual world. I would probably disagree with that. But what I would say is that when God forbids an image in the Old Testament, it's because images and idols were meant to mediate God. But God in the Old Testament wants to be known by his character and in relationship, as we started with the Ten Commandments, right? By what he had done. And that's the focus. That after the commandments as well, that God is living and active. He's not stagnant. He's not just an image. He's with them. And so thus now, as we depict actions and Christ himself, we're in fact representing his character and his relationship to us. We're remembering that God has acted to be near, to be present with us in a very real way, not just the cloud, but now in Christ. God tabernacled among us, as John 1:14 would put it. And there, God's presence fills the actual tabernacle that they have built. And so now we would say Christ can replace that. Thus, and as we think about icons, we can also think about how, in a similar way, we use things like stained glass windows. We have one here at our church of the Good Shepherd to remind us of who God is and his character, and how we've seen that displayed in Jesus through these word pictures and now depicted in images by his life and his actions. I have a whole other issue with the doctrine of theosis in Eastern Orthodox Church, which is that we become like God, and how they have skewed how they use that word in a way that makes me a little uncomfortable now, but that's a whole other conversation.
I want to know about this whole thing in verse 5. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments.
So you want to know about that?
Yeah, I want to know about that. Well, okay, no, I have heard people use this verse as a reason you shouldn't adopt children.
Oh, weird. I have never heard that.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's like a thing.
Okay.
Like there are church bodies that specifically teach that you should not adopt children because you will receive punishment for their parents' and grandparents' sins.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That has never been the Lutheran understanding of it.
Sure.
Which is not really surprising, because Luther and Katie were like, everybody come into our home.
Right.
Like that was just their like MO. So one, let's remember that jealousy from God is not human jealousy.
Right. It's not sinful.
No. And I feel like the best way to describe God's jealousy would be within a marriage. And if I saw you and experienced you no longer talking to me and constantly going out of your way to talk to some other man, I would rightfully be jealous.
Sure.
Because that's not the way this relationship should go. I'm the one who is now, in a sense, owed your affection.
Yeah.
Because we've made that commitment. And so God, rightly, as our creator, as the one who loves us with an unyielding love, is deserving of that. And he does not put up with rivals who will harm his beloved. So that's why he's jealous. But that's probably not where you were struggling with this, obviously.
Right.
So the way I like to think about this, and I think this is the best understanding I've got of it, is that in a sense, the visiting of the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation is limited, right? It has a limit compared to thousands of those who hate me, of those who love me. And I think this takes seriously the reality of, in a sense, generational sins. So if you think about, for better or worse, just sociologically, when the father or a mother commits a sin, it tends to be handed down to the next generation.
Right.
It's still a struggle. And part of that is the rejection of him continues to get handed down because we learn from our parents how to value, how to reject, how to act in certain ways. And so this is speaking in a sense of natural consequences. Now, can those cycles be broken? 100% they can, especially by coming to faith in God.
Sure.
And by turning to him. And praise be to God when those cycles of abuse or addiction or sexual sins or those things are broken by God's grace. And when we have faithful parents, that love of God, that faithfulness, we see it get handed down, right? We talk about this, I think, in other places, but the number one factor in whether or not kids remain in the church is whether or not their parents are in church and value it.
Specifically the dad.
Specifically the father, yeah. As the head of the household. Instilling that love in the next generation and modeling that it matters. Which, I've gotten a lot better since I married you and since I sang a lot out of key. But this is one of those places where I this is a stretch, and I'm going in a direction that I wasn't planning on going with this. But I think, and this is where I love our congregation and a majority of Lutheran churches, so many people today don't want to sing. And I think if you love God, you want to sing his praises, and you shouldn't give a rip what anybody else thinks about your tone. Now, if you know you're terrible, maybe with a little less volume so that everyone can sing in key. We had a member in Montana who, God bless him, he loved to sing. But even up front, and when he would sit in the back, 5-6 pews, you could hear him over everyone else.
Oh, yeah.
And he was singing the song, but he wasn't singing the tune.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm 100% certain that pleases God more than the person who refuses to sing.
Yeah.
Refuses to participate. Because if our God is the God who has brought us out of the house of slavery, out of Satan's domain, why would we not sing his praise? There's a hymn, it's not in our hymnal, and I think it's a travesty. There's, I don't know, 3 or 4 different versions of it, but I believe the title is, How Can I Keep From Singing?
Oh, yeah.
And I love that song so much. Because it just expresses, if God has done this, how can I do anything less than bring my praise to God? How can I not?
If love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?
Yeah. Obviously, you know the hymn.
I do.
So, yeah, I think that's just a majestic and beautiful thing and a beautiful thought to hold on to. And, I should have known. I should have known we would only get through the first commandment. I bet we can get through 2 through 10 next time. But we'll pick it up there. This is, like you said, this is the command that governs everything else. We didn't even talk about how to handle it as Christians yet.
Yeah, we didn't get into explanation of this commandment or anything.
But we'll get there. We'll do that next time. So we got through a whole 6 verses today.